Hello everyone, this video is going to talk about visualizing flames, how we're going to do it, how we're going to take pictures. The previous video talked about the effects of ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, so if you need a reminder of how those work, you can either look on firescience.com in the visualizing flames page or watch the previous video about DSLRs and the imaging flames, or however I title it. I'm not sure I'm going to do it yet. Anyway, so let's say we want to take pictures like this, where we have some experiment going on, we have a burner, and we may want to capture a certain phenomenon happen. Obviously, if we record it with a video, we can capture the whole thing, but if we want to take high resolution images, we can use a DSLR on either a burst mode or just clicking pictures by hand. The nice thing about burst mode is you don't have to know when things are going to happen. Sometimes things happen relatively quickly. Other times they happen quite slowly. So if we think about stochastic techniques, if we don't know when something's going to happen, let's say we have an experiment where a burst disk is going to explode at some point. We don't know when it's going to happen, but we're going to try and capture the fireball coming out of the burst disk or something like that. It's similar to trying to take pictures of lightning. Okay, so one way to take pictures of lightning is you take your camera, set it up on a tripod, point it towards the thunderstorm, and start taking pictures. Obviously, most people's minds aren't quick enough to see lightning and then take a picture so it actually captures. So these are three images I took outside of our lab where the storm was there. I just set up the camera and started taking pictures. I took about 1,000 pictures in 15 minutes, and 3 of them turned out pretty good images of lightning. So I call that stochastic techniques, where you just point the camera at let's say a phenomenon you think is going to happen at some point, and hopefully you capture it. Unfortunately, most DSLRs are pretty slow. I use a Nikon D90, which only runs about 4 frames per second for maybe a few seconds, and then it's down to about 2 frames per second. Once the buffer fills, everything slows down. One way to determine how quickly your camera is actually taking a picture is to record a stopwatch. I wanted to know how quickly I was getting images once the buffer filled, and it turns out to be about half a second. I'm getting about 2 frames a second, so I set up a stopwatch and just started taking pictures of the output. So you can do that if you're curious as to what your camera is actually doing. Alright, so focusing on a flame is usually pretty difficult. I like to use, the camera's automated systems have trouble picking out the flame as opposed to the wall behind it or some screen in front of it if you're using a blast shield of some kind. So I like to use a focus target. So this image is kind of what I like to do, where you have I just printed a target off the internet, and then I'll stick it in the burner that I'm using, and then either manually focus the camera itself or set it on automatic, take an image of the target so that it automatically focuses on the target, and then shut off the automatic mode, and then run the experiment with it on a manual mode without adjusting the focus. You can see with lights on, it's hard to focus, to get the camera to focus on, let's say, this bit, or even this. This is a quartz tube, and it's hard to see the flame with the lights on, so you may want to turn your lights off. This is working in a completely dark lab, and you can see the flame nicely. I think I have a flashlight off to the side just so you can see the quartz tube a little bit. And so if you want a crisp, clean image of, this is a laminar premixed natural gas flame. It's a little bit rich because you can see the diffusion shroud hanging out. But to get this kind of image, you really need to be in a dark environment because you can't see the diffusion shroud if the lights are on. It just doesn't produce enough light to show up on your camera. It gets washed out by the background. So focusing, important. I like to use targets in an automatic mode and then set it to manual so that the focal plane stays where I want. And then to get enough illumination with a premix flame, you usually have to work in a dark environment. organizing images from experiments is sometimes kind of hard. You may take, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 pictures in a day, and so you take a couple hundred pictures for each run of the experiment, and you're trying to figure out where they break. So one thing I like to do is to use a long exposure and hold a card in front of the experiment to let me know what experiment I'm about to record, and this lets me and then move the card halfway through the exposure so that you can see both the card and the experiment. So this lets me do two things. One, I get to say, okay, I can break up the images because I know above, let's say this is test 4, the ones that were recorded before this were obviously test 3, and the ones that were recorded after this are obviously test 4. But not only is this an interesting thing to do with the camera, I think it's neat to move things in and out of long exposures so that you can see through them, but I can also look at the flame and be like, okay, this is test 4. I know that it's supposed to look like this, so I'm pretty sure I had it set right when I started the test, since I can see through my card. And then I can go back and be like, okay, here's my actual image, capture the flame, and maybe I want to analyze it in some way. This is using a copper tube rather than a quartz tube, and I think it's a slot burner. Can't remember now, because there's a cap, and I was cutting slots and caps for some things a while back. Anyway, so long experiments, I like time-lapse videos. So for example, I made one recently, but this video is of a sunset. Obviously it took, I think it was a couple hours worth of videos, but they were 10 seconds apart, and you can watch the flames go away, or the sun go down. You can do the same thing with let's say a smoldering pile, or an automatic heating stack, or something like that, auto heating stack or self-heating stack, whatever you want to call it. And so you take all these pictures and then you need to combine them. So I've written a MATLAB script that will put the images together into a video. You can get a lot. There's multiple codes you can get to do this. The MATLAB isn't the most efficient, but it does work, and it lets you edit let's say you wanted to crop the images all in the same way. MATLAB is a good thing to do that, a good way to do that, because I don't know of another way to do it. When you want to mount your cameras, oh yeah, interesting note, in Windows, let's say you want to rename your file, you can use, if you highlight your image name and then rename it like image 100001 or whatever file type you like, JPEG, it'll start it. This is 10,001 and count up from 10,001, as opposed to if you use something like start at 0001, it won't hold a 0 and it'll go 0001 and then give you another one after this. So it's really annoying. The reason you want to do this is so that, well, it's important for me because when you compile the images, MATLAB orders them from least to greatest, well, orders them alphanumerically. So it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then I'm trying to remember why it messes up, but anyway, it messes up, the order messes up once you get greater than 10 or greater than 100. I can't remember. Yeah, it'll go like 99, 10, 100, and that's no good. Mounting the cameras, most cameras tend to use a typical 1/4 inch standard thread. So if you want to build your own mount, you can take a tripod, rip it apart, and then mount the tripod head on something else. Or you can just build your own frame, stick a 1/4 inch bolt through the bottom and screw it onto your camera, and you're good to go. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say. I used an infrared 87 tip-in filter here. I think the images that come through just bleed through visible light. I'm not completely sure, but there were 30-second exposures, so that was interesting. Anywho, alright, I hope you found this video useful, and have a good day. If you want to review this, you can go to firescienceTools.com and look at the Visualizing Flames page. Have a good day.